Hello and welcome to Films for the Very First Time. My name is Jordan, and with me, as always, is Casey McGeorge. How are you take, Casey?
Oh, let me tell you something, brother. How's it going, everybody? Had to get my Hulk Hogan out there. I'm doing pretty good, man. Doing pretty good.
Yeah, so if you need a recap on what we do for this podcast each week, one of us picks a movie or a show, or in this case, an event that the other one has not seen, and we talk about it. So uh, Casey will tell us what we're about to talk about. I'll have to figure out how I'm going to title it because it's three different things. But um, look, Casey wanted to share his love of this with me, and this I know it's a little bit of a departure of what we usually talk about on here, but it's around that time of season, I think, as well, right? So we're going to talk about it, and then we will discuss in depth, I guess.
All right, so we are recording this in the beginning of March. By the time this airs, this will be at the end of March, maybe beginning of April. I know it's every couple weeks, and I don't want to look at a calendar. So, uh, for me, that's always the best time of year. For you, it is because it's the start of baseball season. We'll touch on later, I'm sure.
And
But for
soccer
me,
season. I got both of my favorite sports going on at the same
see,
time.
there you go. For me, I'm 45 years old. For 40 years, if not more, I've been a wrestling fan. And I've enjoyed professional wrestling since the days of small territories spread throughout the country and larger than life monsters characters like Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, Big John Studd, people like that. And it is WrestleMania season by the time this will air. And I'm kind of a lapsed fan right now where I don't watch it as much as I used to. Back in the 90s, early 2000s, I was watching like every week, but it just got to be too much. But still watch the bigger events. And like we talked about before, you shared your love with me of The Office and of Lord of the Rings. And I can tell you really enjoyed those and you were passionate about those. And I know this is not your cup of tea, but I wanted to show you why I have a love for professional wrestling. And I picked what I believe are three of the best matches as far as storytelling in professional wrestling goes. So yeah, this is gonna be a little weird to go through because I know we used to talk about like where we were and how we got into stuff, but we have three different events, so we can't really do that because they all take place at three separate times, which is also a good kind of way to look at how the industry kind of changed over those three times. But so before we start, we'll kind of keep the same thing. Like I said, I'm 45. I've been a wrestling fan since I was like 4 or 5 years old. Right. I remember Hulk Hogan and the Rock and Wrestling era, and the TV show or the cartoon that they had. And as we talked about when we did the Goonies, how a lot of professional wrestlers showed up in the Goonies or in the music video that they did with Cyndi Lauper for the Goonies. Cyndi Lauper was part of the first WrestleMania, and it was one of their ways to kind of reach out to a more mainstream audience and stuff like that, right? And like I said, there were characters like the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov and Andre the Giant, Rowdy Roddy Piper, and all these other just bombastic, larger than life characters. And I mean, as a 5-year old in the '80s, it got me hooked. And wrestling has gone through many different changes since then. It's still going through evolutions and changes, but I just the best way it's been put to me is like it's a male soap opera, and I'm down for it. I'm here for the ride. What is your experience, or how or why did you not get into professional wrestling at all?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of things, it kind of comes down to I watch what my parents watch a lot of times. Right? Like when you're a kid, and it most of the time, like when I was growing up, the way it was with cable, like probably only had like main like most cable in like the main room. I did at some point get it in my bedroom too and stuff, but uh for a while just kind of be like whatever um my parents are watching, we watch. So I grew up watching a lot of sitcoms. I grew up watching a lot of like 80s movies and stuff, so like that's how I what I kind of grew up with. I did have friends that were really into it, and I had my cousin Brandon was really into it. I don't know how much he still pays attention now to it, but
Around what time was this when you said your cousin
mm,
was really into it?
let's
Late
say like
90s, early 2000s,
probably he was born in '96, so probably
mid 2000s, 2004 or 5, somewhere in
yeah,
that range.
I would say probably like '05, '07 for sure. We used to play the video game, so like most of my experience comes from the video game. And what we would do is, this will sound really nerdy, but what my cousin was really good at making characters in the game. Like, he is an artist. He's very good at like okay, so one of the characters we put in Lost characters, right? He would like make the characters from Lost, like Jack Shepherd going up
Yes.
against Sawyer, and that's what we would do. And we'd make like
Okay.
little tournaments that way. And like he nailed like Jack's face. Like, it wasn't exactly Matthew Fox, but like the eyes, he had the eyes and like the area around the eyes down, where if you looked at it, you're like, that's Matthew Fox. Like, it was pretty close. And he was really good at like, going to the face editor and like doing that stuff. I'm awful at that when I make a character in these games. I don't have the patience to like mess around
You
with it.
scroll through like 2 or 3 options, and then you're like, "Yep, this one will work."
Yeah, that's the
Close enough.
closest. Yeah.
This is what I want. Yeah.
He'll like spend an hour on like working on the guy's face. And we would have characters like that, I forget what other characters we would make, but he mostly, like, we focused on the Lost characters. We were both really big into the show at the time, so it'd be like, all right, we got Hurley, we got Charlie, we got Sawyer, we got Jackie Kate. Like, these are the characters we're putting in here.
I can imagine now Hurley versus Charlie. Yes.
Yes.
Hurley.
And like
Just
Locke,
remember Hurley.
like we had,
Just remember Hurley Spry.
yes, we had all these characters like that, and that was like my biggest experience from it. Otherwise, it'd be like secondhand stuff, right? Like, in school, there was this kid that was obsessed with Stone Cold Steve Austin, always wearing his stuff, always like talking about him. Like, he was just obsessed with him. Like, so I know him. I think he would also mention the Undertaker at times, so I knew who that was. My biggest exposure now is like the Vince McMahon gif of like the like the meme of like the red eyes, or like the orgasmic, thing like that. That kind of stuff is what I know mostly like nowadays. And of course, I know like a person we're going to talk about in this, Sasha Banks. She's in The Mandalorian.
Okay.
So like,
I wasn't sure if you had recognized her. I was going to ask you that later when we came up to her match.
I remember when she got cast, people were like, "Oh, I love her in WWE," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like, so I knew she was a wrestler. And of course, Cena and The Rock. Like, I knew of those people
Batista,
just from like
Dave
pop
Batista,
culture osmosis. I actually didn't really know Dave Batista until Guardians. Like, that was one I never really saw many people talk about. Like, I saw people talk about like Cena, Rock, Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin, of course Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
Right. I'd heard the name of Shawn Michaels. I didn't really, and when I saw him in this, I recognized him from, I guess, people talking about him or something. But like, I don't know most past that, I would say. Oh, Stacy Keibler. I know her. She's a Baltimore girl. Like, I know Stacy Keibler.
I think she was a Ravens cheerleader at once.
She may have been.
I believe she may have been a Ravens cheerleader at once, before she got into the wrestling business. But yeah, she's very much a true Baltimore girl, and she will rep her city in any and every way possible. So like you said, I got exposed to it because back in the 80s, typically you only had like one TV in the house. So like just one. And so as a kid, you watched what your parents were watching, right? Maybe you might get a little time like on Saturday mornings to watch cartoons or stuff like that. But a lot of times, typically, you watch what your parents watched, and that was that. There was only one, maybe your parents had one in their bedroom, but typically in the living room or den or whatever you want to call it, that's where everybody gathered to watch TV and stuff, and there was the one TV in there, and that was it. And I got hooked onto it through my family. All right. So we're going to talk about 3 separate matches. The first one is from WrestleMania 21, which took place April 3rd in 2005 at the Staples Center or what was called the Staples Center. Now it's the Crypto.com Arena or something. I don't know. In Los Angeles, California, which was tagline WrestleMania Goes Hollywood. If you get a chance, they did a bunch of promos for this, right? Where they took a bunch of famous films and they took their wrestlers to put them in there and kind of did skits out of them. So there was one of like Dave Bautista. He was playing Robert De Niro's character from Taxi Driver, and he actually didn't get it. He was doing the whole "Are you talking to me?" thing, but he actually didn't get what was going on when they filmed him. So he was really getting perturbed of like the whole "Are you talking to me?" like what's going on. But they did a bunch of little skits like that, right? Which was pretty good. Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle. So you watch these on Peacock, and did you use the links or the time codes I sent to you when you watch these?
Yeah, use the time codes, yeah.
Okay. So
and they'll be in the show notes as well for the episode previous to this and for the episode now. So if you haven't watched them, you can pause and go watch them.
So one of the reasons I gave you those time codes is WWE's production team, I don't think gets a ton of credit because, especially for their big events and their big matches like this, they put together these video packages that kind of will give you the gist of what's going on, who these people are, why they have their beef with each other, right? And how it started and what led to whatever it is that we're about to watch. And they put together some really, really good ones. I think one of the best ones, or what's widely acknowledged as one of the best ones, is before WrestleMania 17 at the Houston Astrodome. Stone Cold Steve Austin was fighting The Rock for the championship. And they put together a video package between the two of them with a Limp Bizkit song of, what was it? I can't even think of the name of it. It's I forget, but it's a Limp Bizkit song. Like if you look up WrestleMania 17 Stone Cold Steve Austin, like the promo, it's like 2 or 3 minutes, and there's an intensity. Like those two people had a healthy respect for each other, but you could tell there was an intensity of wanting to be the best, of wanting to be on top, of wanting to be the man, and it really comes through in that video package. Like they have a respect for each other, but they kind of maybe don't like each other totally. But I mean, those two are two of the biggest stars the industry has ever seen, and they put on great matches and stuff like that. So, what did you think of the video package of Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels?
Okay, so here's my question. So I do know for wrestling you have your heels, right?
Yes.
And you have your heroes and stuff like that.
Your baby face, as they're called, yes.
Who is supposed to be the heel here?
Okay, good question. So, in the 80s, early 90s, they would typically go with that, the heel and the baby face. Your heel is just your bad guy, your black hat. Your baby face is your good guy, your white hat, right? Stuff like that. They had a period in the mid to late 90s where things changed, and they kind of realized not everything is just so black and white. And things are various shades of gray in between. You still have on extreme ends, your good guy, your bad guy, right? But in between, you have tweeners and just these people, especially now, we call them anti-heroes and stuff like that, right? But you have people who are on one side of the fence, but maybe sometimes use some nefarious means to get their things done. Or sometimes they're on the other side of the fence, but they can still play to the crowd. In this, Kurt Angle was meant to be the bad guy. Shawn Michaels was meant to be the good guy. But wrestling crowds are very fickle, especially your hardcore wrestling crowds. They know a lot more about the business and how things work than your average fan. And 2, they're going to cheer or boo whoever in the hell they want, regardless of how much you shove stuff down their throats and try and get them to go one way or the other. John Cena is a prime example. For years, he has been a babyface. He's been a good guy forever. Like he was a bad guy when he first came in, and he had this kind of Marky Mark white rapper gimmick, right? And he's a bad guy, but then he changed some stuff up and he became a good guy, and it was great for a while. And we talked about it before, how he does all kinds of work with. Why is my brain not working right now? So amped up.
Make a Wish.
Yeah, he does so many Make a Wish things. Like he'll never be able to turn heel. He'll never be able to turn to a bad guy. But at some point, the crowd just got sick and tired of him, and they just started booing him just because they were like, "We're done with this guy."
That was my main question, because so I wanted to know who I should have been rooting for, right? Who they wanted me to root for. So you're saying Shawn Michaels is who they wanted me to root for, because they didn't do a good job of that in this package. Is what.
So here's the thing.
I was Team Kurt here, okay, because he actually won a gold medal. So I understood his beef. Apparently, that's the whole storyline here, right? Is that he is upset that everybody sees Shawn Michaels as the best because he has actually won a gold medal, and he's the only one to have done so in WWE.
Okay. Which, once again, goes back to these various shades of gray, right? And plus, Kurt Angle is so good in the ring. He's so good at what he does. Even if you boo him, even if you don't like his character, you have to enjoy what he does in the ring, and you have to have a healthy respect for him as a performer. So that's what I'm saying. Like, there's these various shades of gray in various things. So, Kurt Angle, as we talked about, he won a gold medal in freestyle wrestling in the heavyweight division in the 96 games in Atlanta, which he won with as in his words, with a broken friggin' neck. He legitimately had a broken neck. He, where is it? Damn it. So yeah, he messed up like a couple vertebrae. It was bad. Legitimately had a broken neck, had to take some time off. And then he got into professional wrestling. He is one of 4 people ever to win the Junior Nationals, the NCAA, the World Championships, and an Olympic medal, or the Olympic gold medal in this case, known as the Amateur Grand Slam. 2006, he was named by USA Wrestling as the greatest shoot wrestler of all time, which is legitimate wrestling. And he was one of USA Wrestling's top 15 college wrestlers of all time. 2016, he was inducted into the International Sports Hall of Fame. So, Kurt Angle is as legitimate as they come in the world of wrestling. As you heard many times in this, he's the only Olympic gold medalist in WWE history.
Yeah, they got that point across very well.
Shawn Michaels. He is possibly the greatest in-ring performer in professional wrestling history. At one point, we'll talk about this later, which you probably got during the next match we're going to talk about. In his heyday, he was a dick. Like, he was good. He was.
I got that in this too. The dance coming out for the intro, I'm like, all right, this guy is
okay. So that's
here, right?
The dance is just kind of part of his character. He also sings his own theme song. That's him singing his theme song, right? And
is it really?
Yes, it is legitimately him singing his own theme song.
I did not know that. No.
Also, he had a spread in the pages of Playgirl at one point in the early 90s. But he went through a lot of like drug issues and pill issues, and he had some very serious issues along with that. We'll kind of get more into this later, but he lost 4 years of his career to a horrible back injury, possibly. We'll talk about that later. Where he legitimately hurt himself in a match, was out for like 4.5 years, and then came back. And when he came back, he started, during his time off, he became a born-again Christian and found faith and became a better person. And then when he came back to the business, he started making amends to the people that he kind of wronged. Because he was so good at what he did, Vince McMahon basically just had to put up with him. Like, he just kind of let him do whatever he wanted, and he did some horrible things and treated people horribly and just kind of used his clout that he had to do whatever he wanted and squash how other people were going about it, right? And it made the company money, but it kind of had horrible effects on other people, and things didn't always go the best way. But he's in a much better place now, personally, and professionally and everything. So he's had periods of time where he went back and forth between good guy and bad guy. So he does have some of those cocky and bad guy tendencies. But his whole thing of like the cockiness and the dancing, that's just more of a character. Like when he first started out wrestling by himself in singles, he had this thing where he was kind of a ladies' playgirl type thing, and the women loved him, right? Obviously. And they had this thing where he would do his match or whatever, and later on in the show, just like Elvis, they would make an announcement that Shawn Michaels has left the building, right? But it just kind of went with his whole persona. So what did you think of not only the video package, but the grand entrances that these guys have with the pyro and everything else?
A little much. a little much. So I'm trying to remember what Kurt's intro was like, because I remember what Shawn Michaels comes in and he's even got like the like what the weird vest on that he has, that he's got like suspenders almost that he's gonna take off. I don't know what that is, but at first I thought he was gonna wrestle in that, and then he takes that off.
Yeah.
But I knew this was a thing, right? Like I said, when we played the video game, we used to customize their intros and all that kind of stuff. Very like reminds me of like some NFL teams now when they enter the stadium, how they'll do.
Where do you think they got it from?
Right. They got it from wrestling, I assume, right? Back in the day, football games were a lot more
toned down.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
So, not everybody gets all the grand pyro and everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's reserved.
I didn't know. Was that for like reserved? Like you said, you sound like you're going to say reserved for these type of people, or is it like a WrestleMania thing? Like, do they have toned down?
Both. Like, so they will have, like, for Monday Night Raw or smaller pay-per-views, they will have some of the same things, but stuff like that is really reserved for their top stars. Like the average dude coming out, even if he's an okay wrestler, like he's not.
So I couldn't get that.
Me and you are not getting pyro being set off, and like I listened to something about it a while before. It's really expensive. One, because that's not the only time that stuff has to be set off. You have to have like fire marshals there. You have to have people there for safety
tests and stuff too.
Yeah, you have to test it out. So that stuff has to be done at least once beforehand, right? And stuff like that. And there's been a case of like a couple wrestlers have been injured from some pyro going haywire, right?
Wow.
And one, the Undertaker, who like got burned and still wrestled the match after he got burned, and then told Vince McMahon later, "I don't ever want to see that guy again." And the guy who did that pyro was never seen working for them again. That's really reserved for the bigger stars and the bigger spectacles like of WrestleMania. And then, like I said, at WrestleMania, you're going to get your more knowledgeable crowds. These are the crowds that are going to cheer for whoever it is that they want, boo whoever it is they want, and then you'll have crowds in certain cities: Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. Same thing.
Yeah, it's in Philly this year, right?
Yes.
I think I saw that somewhere.
They will literally boo or cheer who and however they want, because those are your really, really smart crowds. So yeah, this is kind of a two different styles. So Kurt Angle is more of your mat wrestler. He's your technical wrestler. As Jim Ross called it, Shawn Michaels does a catch as a catch can, which no one has ever been able to explain that to me. But it's more of, I guess, maybe a free flowing type of style, right? What did you think of the announcers? Were you able to follow the story with how the announcers were kind of laying things out and as things were going, or?
The most I noticed them, I think, was actually in the last match that we're going to talk about. That I've noticed them as being like what I would say characters of themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like I didn't get that as much in these two. Like I felt like they were telling me stuff I needed and stuff. They kind of added their own, like, not to spoil when we get to the third one, but there's like times where they seem openly rooting for one of them, and the other one's like, "You're an idiot. It's this. Like this is what's going."
Okay.
Like I didn't
Okay.
get that as much in these two matches. I don't think, unless if it went over my head, but um, I think that they told me stuff I needed to know as somebody that's never watched one. But I also have a bunch of questions.
Okay. We'll get to your questions. Feel free to pop in. We'll get to. But yes, you are correct. At least for a long period of time, you would have your play-by-play announcer, right? Which was usually going for the good guys and always wanted the good things and the right things to happen. Which in this case was Jim Ross, right? Good old JR, as he's called. And then you would have your color commentator, who would add quips, and typically a lot of times was a former wrestler. In this case, it was Jerry the King Lawler. And a lot of times he was your heel guy. He was going for the bad guys. He was kind of overlooking things, or maybe he wasn't looking when the bad guy cheated because he was looking away and he didn't see that. And he would add his funny quips and stuff. And there have been various versions of this that have gone through history. You had Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Bobby Ventura, or Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby the Brain Heenan, and stuff like that. So typically a lot of times they would pair them up like that. You're correct. In the last match we're going to talk about, that was more of an open case with that one, where it was one was kind of distinctly rooting for the good guy, one was distinctly, or girl in this case, more distinctly rooting for the bad girl. Also at this time, so there's two separate. It's all WWE, but there was two separate programs. You had Monday Night Raw, which was on Monday night, and now SmackDown, which is on Friday, but it used to be on Thursday nights as well. So at one point, because they had so many wrestlers, they had a draft and they did what was called a brand split. So they had wrestlers that distinctly worked just Monday Night Raw, and whatever shows, like when they did their tours around the country, they're called house shows, where they go to like these other arenas on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, stuff like that. It was all Raw wrestlers. And then you had the ones who worked for SmackDown, right? They had their own announced team and they had their own set of wrestlers, and then they worked. They had a separate schedule that did hit different towns on different days and stuff like that. And then during your big events, they would come together, and sometimes they'd have matches with each other. They even went as far as having separate, smaller pay-per-views. So like WrestleMania this one was in April. Then maybe they'd have one at the end of April or beginning of May that was a Raw one. And then May or June would be a SmackDown pay-per-view, stuff like that. That would kind of give them longer time to advance storylines and set stuff up, stuff like that. So in this one, Shawn Michaels worked on Monday Night Raw. Kurt Angle worked on SmackDown. And you didn't necessarily get it in this match or the next one, because the announcers were all from one brand. The announcers were Monday Night Raw announcers. So they kind of were typically going more for the Monday Night Raw guy. But they kept bringing up, especially in this match, that it was a SmackDown refereeing the match. So maybe that portion makes a little more sense. Like, why are they saying who the referee's from?
Right.
So yeah, typically they would do that, but they've kind of gone away from that a little bit. But sometimes it still comes out.
Well, thank you for explaining that, because I will say, as somebody that has no knowledge of this stuff,
yes,
I do know the names Raw and SmackDown just from commercials, right?
yeah,
Like watching
and the video
TV,
games,
yeah, and they're like Monday night on Raw on USA Today, and the USA Network, like I know like that, but I had no clue if they were actually like that they were sometimes split between things like that. I just thought it was like, oh, our Monday night thing is called Raw, and our whatever day this is SmackDown. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. It used to be like that. It used to be.
And then at some point they split them. And
they had such a glut of wrestlers because World Championship Wrestling, the Southern company, WCW, went out of business. And then they hired a bunch of those guys. And now let's say you've got like 100 wrestlers, but you only have 2 hours on Monday, 2 hours on Thursday
Right.
or Friday for a show, right? You kind of want these guys, one, they need the work, right? To get out in front of a crowd, to get work on TV. That's kind of how they get better and develop their character and kind of advance things. And then that's also how you can tell who the crowd's getting behind and who they're not, and so on and so forth. So that's when at one point, they decided to do the brand split. And okay, they would legitimately once a year or so would have a draft, and it would be a big thing. And it'd be like, okay, with the first pick of the draft, Monday Night Raw selects this guy, and then you'd have wrestlers going back and forth between shows. And then that can kind of freshen up some of the feuds that they would have, because now it's a whole different group of people they get to work with, and so on and so forth.
So I guess another question for me is, was like Raw and SmackDown like previously pay-per-view and then get on the TV, or were they like their specific TV brands that they made? Because I know at one point it was on USA Network.
Yeah, Raw was on USA. Then it went to what was TNN, which became Spike TV. Yeah. Then it went back to USA Network, and now, now it's going to Netflix next year.
That's right.
SmackDown, which was a term coined by The Rock, or Dwayne Johnson as he is now known.
So does he get paid for that then?
I don't know. And
actually, like you developed that as a wrestler here, so that is it's our private property.
I don't know, because he's actually on the board of directors now, and he just got the rights back to the name The Rock and a whole bunch of catchphrases and trademarks that he used to use. But okay, interesting fact. You say that a lot of times WWE would come up with their own names for a lot of these characters, because then they could own the intellectual property rights to that character. And they, for a long time, they didn't want people using their real name, because they can't trademark or copyright the real name. Right. Except in the case of Kurt Angle, because he's an Olympic gold medalist. Like,
what you want to use that so people know it's him when they're turning it. They're like, I remember him from '96. Like, I'm gonna watch this.
So, that whole thing gets really weird, and then there's the whole independent contractor status, and it's a long, horrible story. But so what did you think of the action in the ring? I remember last time I told you, don't watch the match, follow the story.
Right.
Throughout the course of these 3 matches, does that make more sense now after hearing that and then watching it? Did that help in any way?
That's a good question, because so I found a common theme between these, at least the first 2 matches, all right? Was, and I don't know if this is how every wrestling match goes or not. I found it a little less prevalent in the third one. How many times the person was close to being counted out and then is able to just kick out or raise their shoulder enough, and then it seems like the commentators, like 5 minutes in this match, are ready to call it, and then it's like, whoa, no, he's out of it, and then like, so that's my biggest question. Is it like a Shawn Michaels thing with who he's facing all the time, or is this constantly how it is with, like, it felt like 10 times in a match where they're like about to lose, and then and I don't know who's gonna win then, because they keep flipping it like that, or like one of them's about to get counted out, and then all of a sudden he has the upper hand, and now he's the one that's about to count out the other person, and it's like, is that a typical structure, or is that like a Shawn Michaels Wrestlemania type of thing?
I think that might be more of a Shawn Michaels type of thing, or maybe some of your big matches that kind of, they want to increase the drama. Every now and then you will have a match where it's kind of called a squash match, where somebody just goes in and just totally dominates. It used to be big in the 80s when you're trying to get somebody to elevate them and get them to be bigger character.
Be popular, yeah.
And to show how much of a badass they are. So, like, especially if you're trying to establish somebody as a badass, they might take on some lesser known guys, and they might get a squash match. But one prime example I could think of was Brock Lesnar came back after a long hiatus. And he had a match with John Cena at SummerSlam a few years back. And those two have some history and things. And he just absolutely dominated the match. I mean, it was even to the point where one of the announcers literally said on the air, "Jesus Christ!" Like, and it was one of those things where he just decimated John Cena. But it was also mainly to show how much of a badass Brock Lesnar really was. And for Cena to kind of have to eventually he did do some work to get back up, but it was a very long storyline thing because Cena had fought The Rock at WrestleMania that year, and he lost to The Rock, and so he was kind of having a down and bad year, and that kind of coincided with it, and then he kind of worked his way back up. Blah, blah, blah. And Brock Lesnar was the one, as we'll talk about in the next match. Undertaker had an undefeated streak at WrestleMania. Brock Lesnar was the one who ended that undefeated streak, and this was literally right after he ended the streak. WrestleMania happens in April. This was August, and it was brought up. He wasn't sure about, that's how they wanted to do the match, but both Vince McMahon and John Cena were like, "No, like this is neat. Like you just ended the Undertaker's undefeated streak. Like this is one of the most impressive things in the history of our business and our company. Like, no, we need you to be like this unstoppable monster." And then that's what happened. So typically, the way a lot of matches will go, feeling out period in the beginning, maybe the good guy kind of gets some advantages here and there. Eventually, the bad guy takes over, right? And he starts dominating, and he's winning and beating. He's beating him in the match. And then you have what's called the comeback, where your good guy will feed into, or the bad guy will feed into the comeback, because this is when the good guy finally musters the courage and the strength and whatever. And a lot of times, and I'm sure you might have been able to notice, everyone in these, especially high profile wrestlers, has like a tell where like they're kind of getting their second win. Kurt Angle, when he pulled the straps down on his singlet, right? He even did it like a couple times in this match. The Undertaker did that, and he had the throat slashing thing in his. In the last match, one of the girls will talk about, Bayley, she has, when she takes that ponytail and tightens it up, this when she's like, all right, we're getting into this, right? And then they go on a comeback, and maybe they get the upper hand. And then that's when you can kind of tell you're coming towards your conclusion of the match. Sometimes that'll happen a couple times, but you're coming towards the conclusion. But then it can still go either way, because sometimes the bad guy still finds a way to overcome things. Sometimes it's fairly and cleanly. Sometimes they have to cheat. Sometimes you have a guy like Eddie Guerrero, who was a good guy, but the way his character was one of his mottos was, he lies, he cheats, he steals. So he was a good guy, but he would cheat in such... Okay, so one example was, the referee would be distracted looking at something outside, right? He would grab a championship belt or a chair, right? And then right before the referee would turn around, he would throw the chair to the other guy, or the belt, who would catch it, and then he would just like go down on his back like he just got knocked out by the chair. So the referee turns around, he sees this dude holding a chair, Eddie Guerrero's knocked out, right? And then the referee's like, sometimes he would disqualify the other dude. Sometimes he'd take the chair away, right? And that would be enough for Eddie Guerrero to do his thing and end up winning. But that was part of his character. He lies, he cheats, he steals. And the crowd loved it. And it was one of the greatest things to see, because like, you just be like, are you serious? Is this going to work? God damn it, it works. So, like every character has their own quirks.
I'll just say, if that happened in the NFL, people would be asking for that ref to get fired. I was distracted. I was looking at something else. I know
happens.
It's part of the thing.
Hey, look, if there's a streaker on the field or something, the referee's got to look over here, right? And then someone else comes over here and knocks the guy out. What are you going to do? He can't see it, So,
okay, talking about refs real quick.
Yeah.
What are they doing? He would like randomly like slap or like touch the back of the guy? Is that to make sure that the shoulder's not touching? Like it just seemed like
Okay.
he was touching them randomly at times. I'm like, what are you doing?
Okay. Depending when he does it, there are different things that go with it, right? So you got to think about this. That was, like I said, in the Staples Center. So let's say there's 15 or 20,000 people there, right? So a lot of times what you might have saw was like, say, Shawn Michaels or Kurt Angle would hit each other, and then the referee would do one of these, and he would kind of hit his hand as well, right? And you'd be like, why is that? And I listened to some podcasts, and this was explained, like, you got to remember, there's people who are up front who can see things really well. They're ringside, they have great seats, they can see what's going on. People a little further back, not so much. You get people up at the top in the cheap seats or the seats that they could afford who can't totally see everything that's going on, right? But everything that's happening still has to be relayed up to them. So something like that, that's kind of letting them know, like, hey, there was a hit, smack, whatever. Sometimes, so if a wrestler's being pinned, and you might see him like take his hand and kind of like see if his shoulder's down. Because according to the rules of professional wrestling, if one of his shoulders is off the mat, he can't count to 3. Or that will break up the pinfall, right? As long as one of his shoulders is off the mat. So sometimes you might see him go in and check, and he's got to double check.
I think that's what it was, but it was like the shoulder was like so far off that I couldn't even think it would be down. And he's like going and he's like lightly touching the shoulder and then touching the mat and then like I guess looking to see if there's enough space. But there was like clearly enough space. But I guess that you said you're relaying that to people up there.
There's also take the situation of the table that didn't break, right? When he kind of launched himself off the ropes into Kurt Angle onto the table. That table was supposed to break. It didn't break, which makes things worse because then that's so much harder, right? So a lot of times, big things like that, things that could go really wrong and people can get seriously hurt. The referee goes out there, right? And a lot of times he's communicating with them to double check. Are you okay? Like, like, hey, because sometimes like bad things have happened. People have broken bones and body parts and things. Or sometimes you might see him grab a wrestler's arm or his hand because he needs to know if the wrestler's okay. So the wrestler will sometimes squeeze back to be like, yeah, I'm okay. Because wrestlers have been legitimately knocked out cold where they've had to stop everything or kind of delay to give them a chance to come back to so that, you're not just like wailing on a guy who's legitimately knocked out. The referee also has an IFV in his ear, right? He's getting information from the back. He's talking to Vince McMahon or whoever. So a lot of times they may tell him that they want him to hit certain spots. So the referee has to go back and forth and relay that information to both wrestlers. Or what's called going home. Like he may get information from the back. Okay, take it home. End the match, right? Now, the referee can be put in a tough spot because your boss, Vince McMahon, not there anymore, but during this time, Vince McMahon is telling you to go home. But these are also 2 of your biggest stars. Who are you to tell them to end the match right now? And referees have even admitted they've been in like some really precarious spots because they don't want to, they know the crowd is into it. They don't want to tell these guys, all right, that's it. Sometimes they have to, but sometimes they kind of give them hints like, hey, in the back they're wanting you guys to hurry up or whatever. So it puts them in some weird spots. But sometimes it's literally they're just grabbing or touching just to check to make sure everybody is okay. There's nothing that went haywire or wrong. How did the crowd?
Sorry, I was just saying we had CSI's Marg Helgenberger there.
Yeah.
He showed her in the crowd.
You'd be surprised how many like celebrities really are wrestling fans.
Now, I wonder, was she or was it like this is the event going on? Like I got like sometimes they show up to these events without.
Wrestling is one of those things that has such a weird belief. I don't know what to call it. It's looked at so weirdly. Like back in the day, you were looked at as like a weirdo or a dork if you were into wrestling. Then it became really popular in the 90s, early 2000s. And now it's just had some, some people still feel one way or the other about it, right? I don't think some of these people are going to show up to these events if they're not fans in some way, shape, or form. Now, maybe it wasn't her. Maybe her kids were fans and she was taking them, right?
Yeah.
That's always a possibility. But you got someone like a Gabriel Iglesias, Fluffy, the comedian, who is a big fan. Adam Sandler is a big wrestling fan. Shaquille O'Neal, big wrestling fan. George Kittle, wrestling fan, right? Stuff like that. So, um, what about the crowd? How did, because a crowd can make or break a match. So how are your thoughts of the crowd kind of in this match?
I have to kind of think back here. I don't know. I can't really. I don't remember much of the crowd. I don't know if that's an indictment on them or not. But like I felt like there was times it seemed quiet, and I don't know what the protocol is for this. So, um, they seemed really hyped at the beginning,
Yeah,
and then I felt like probably anytime it was doing like I would say like the feeling out period was probably really quiet, right? Like, I don't know if that's
yeah,
typical, but
that
then you
can be it.
have the the moments that they would like show highlights of, like when he like picks up Shawn Michaels and throws him into the corner of the ring while they're running around the outside, right? Um, and then he goes down. They got excited about that. Some of them did, right? Because some of them are Shawn Michael fans. And then it felt like near the end specifically, when they kept flipping between who had the upper hand, is probably the moment I noticed the crowd the most because um, when Kurt Angle would do this thing when he like has Shawn Michaels by the ankle almost, right?
The ankle lock, yes.
Yeah, that got them really pumped. I'll say that.
That's his finishing move, right? So that so he
Hmm.
makes people submit with the ankle lock. A crowd can really make or break a match. So it is typical, like in feeling out points or early in a match. It may not be as loud, or everyone's trying to see what's going on. But the worst thing for wrestlers is if the crowd is just silent, if they can't hear anything, because that means the crowd is not
Just
into it.
not
They
into
don't
it.
care.
Yeah.
So even boos, even just allow choruses of boos is better than nothing. But if they're, especially now where people have like cell phones and people can just be
Yeah.
on their phone, like it's the worst thing in the world. Especially for big events like this, you can get a crowd can really get into it, and once they get into it, like especially as a crowd can tell as the match goes and it's starting to get closer and closer to that finish, to that climax of okay, like we're getting there. It's before that crowd explodes, right? And sometimes it's a great feeling, sometimes it's a bad feeling. Sometimes it's a bad feeling, but even like in this one, the crowd still has to show its appreciation, like Kurt Angle, for what he just went through. So as we'll see in other matches as well, a lot of wrestlers also have their fair set of moves that they kind of do that lead to something, right? So Shawn Michaels with his little flying forearm, and then he kind of nips up from his back off the ground. Then he has a couple of atomic drops that leads to a flying elbow, which leads to him stomping his foot on the ground for his little super kick. And like, but that's how you know, like, okay, like this dude's getting that second wind, and that's where it's gonna go. So we can't really. So what did you think of the match? This match overall?
Uh, so Kurt won, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
not
I have
necessarily
to
a rating
remember if
system, but did you enjoy, or were you able to follow along with this match?
I was able to follow along. Did I enjoy it? Not really, and that's like I'm sure you saw that coming, right? Like, and that'll be probably a common theme through this. I just like it's not really my thing. Like I can appreciate the art form of it, I guess, right? Like what the feats that they're pulling out here as they're doing the stunts and stuff is impressive. Um but this isn't really for me. I was glad. I guess you could say I was glad Kurt won because, like I said, I was Team Kurt here with that. He's an actual gold medalist. So when they were trying to pull that as like I don't know, it felt like they wanted me to root for Shawn Michaels, but I was like, no, this guy's actually like a gold medalist. Like obviously he's better than Shawn Michaels. So I was glad he won.
All right. So up next in our series, we're gonna go to a match from WrestleMania 25. This was on a show they did called WrestleMania Rewind. This happened April 5th, 2009 at Reliance Stadium in Houston, Texas. This was Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker. So same thing. The story of WrestleMania Rewind, because this was like an hour long total. Did that kind of give you the gist of the info between these two in a decent way?
Yeah, no. I one bonus points for Gary Thorne being the announcer for the narrator for this. He
Who
used to be the
is
voice of the Orioles.
Oh,
So
okay.
like hearing that, I was like, oh my god, Gary Thorne is voicing this. This is like it took me aback. I was like, this is pretty cool. He also does a lot of hockey and stuff now, but he used to be the Orioles from like probably like 2010 to 2019 or something.
Okay.
So bonus points. Um, so this left me with some questions though. Okay, okay.
Okay.
So this was like a behind the scenes type thing, right? Like a documentary type thing until they showed the match.
Yeah, this was just they did these for a lot of different matches, and it was mainly to some of it was behind the scenes, some of it was just to highlight some of their best matches in WrestleMania history to show what led up to it. But yeah, this one kind of did go more behind the scenes than
Yeah.
anything else.
So that's my biggest question about this, right? So like growing up, I just always heard wrestling is fake, right? And some of the stuff you're throwing at me here confuses me with it as well as this, right? So like when you say that like maybe they're telling the ref to wrap it up, right?
Yeah.
But like wouldn't they have had to rehearse all of this, or is it like they have certain moves that they know the people can kind of freelance with? Like that's my biggest question because like they talk about this feud, and I know that's a wrestling thing, but it sounds like really in real life these two didn't like each other.
Oh
So I
no
was
no.
wondering like how much is it real and how much of it is like not when it comes to some of this stuff.
Okay. So yeah, these two legitimately in real life didn't like each other. Like I said, Shawn Michaels was a dick in the day. He was on a lot of pills. He did a lot of drugs. Pissed a lot of people off. The Undertaker had this thing called Wrestler's Court. When they say he was a locker room leader, like there was a lot of times like he was in charge of things that happened in the locker room, and they had some situations where he would discipline people before things got up to Vince McMahon, where things would go further. And Vince McMahon kind of let him run the locker room how he see fit. So some of it was ridiculous, like respect for veterans or various other things like that maybe younger guys didn't have, but they would have these little horrible fake trials, and a lot of times it just took to they were found guilty and they had to buy a bunch of beer and food for the older wrestlers, right? But wrestling locker rooms are really big on decorum. Like there have been like people have been kicked out of wrestling locker rooms and have had to change in the bathroom with fans because they were not allowed back into wrestling locker rooms for periods of time because they've done something that people have been found so offensive or didn't like. But this was also a case, like I said, Shawn, like they couldn't deny Shawn Michaels' skills when, like in the early and mid '90s, when he was on his drug binges, but he was so good. But he did legitimately hurt himself. He had a back injury. They showed it during a casket match. He took a backdrop. Part of his tailbone hits the casket. He herniated 2 discs in his back. Crushed a third. And he had to retire after WrestleMania that year. So he was out for like 4.5 years. Like I said, he became kind of a born-again Christian, changed his ways, realized he was not a good person, and kind of went back. When he came back, he made amends to a lot of people. So yeah, they're like those two legitimately did have some serious beefs. As far as the moves, they some things they do rehearse. Depending on the move, sometimes, especially with your other veterans, they do what's called they'll call it in the ring, where uh, they don't lay out the match. Like they get together, they go to who the producer for that match is, and the producer tells them kind of some things that they have to hit or want them to hit, and who's going to win. Me and you are in a match. Someone comes up, Jordan, you're going to win in this way. Okay, figure it out. So sometimes then the wrestlers get together. Usually it's in catering where they talk stuff through like, okay, we've got 8 minutes to make this happen. That 8 minutes is from the time intros happen until final bell, right? So they've got to figure out, okay, we got 8 minutes to make this happen. How long is this going to take? What do we got to do? We got to hit these points. And then they can kind of lay out what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And then you can look it up on YouTube. There are many clips of them talking to each other in the ring where they will relay information to each other. Do this, do that. Let's go to this spot. Let's do this. Let's do that. Sometimes they're too loud, which is where these other things of these YouTube clips of them talking to each other in the ring come out. And you can very clearly hear them talking to each other like, okay, we're going to do this. Now throw me into the ropes. Okay, I'm coming back with a clothesline. This is kind of what I meant more when I said don't watch the match, follow the story. Because a lot of times if you watch the match itself, there's a lot of things that you can look at and be like, that's not real. That doesn't make any sense, blah, blah, blah. But following the story,
Right.
which is something I have to do when I watch a lot of movies as well. Like, don't watch the movie, just follow the story because I think you kind of know how my brain works a lot. And this happens afterwards a lot. I come up with a lot of questions of like, well, what about this? And what about this? Why didn't they do this? So, this is widely considered the best WrestleMania match of all time. It was one of those where we didn't know how good it was going to be when it came in. But after it happened, a lot of people were like, Jesus Christ, what did I just watch? Like I said, Undertaker had a WrestleMania streak of being undefeated there. He went up to 21-0 before he finally lost. It happened organically and it wasn't even acknowledged until he was 10-0, where he had a match with Ric Flair, where they acknowledged that, oh, he hasn't lost at WrestleMania yet. And then it became its own thing. Yeah. And then it became its own thing. And then it became part of WrestleMania, like who's going to try and end the streak this year. And it was usually like a younger wrestler, someone coming up, whatever, so on and so forth. And
so that's my other question then, I guess, when it comes to this. So you said about I forget who you said that beat him.
Brock Lesnar.
Yes. I heard of him before. Okay. He was 17-0 after this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when did he lose it? A couple years later?
He's 17-0. He went 4 more WrestleManias where he won, and then he lost the 5th one after this. So this was 25. So like he lost to WrestleMania 30. He went to 21-0, and he lost to WrestleMania 30 in New Orleans.
Okay,
and so let me see if I can show you. I'm going to try and show you something if I can figure out how to share something. There's a meme that came from this of when he finally lost. It was such a shocking thing.
Okay. Yeah, if you send it to me in the chat or something, I can pull it up.
Let's see if this will work. God damn it. I'm just going to I'll send you the link and you can you can go from there. So, when this actually happened, this guy's face kind of told the whole story because nobody, like, look, not only him, look at the guy in the little hat behind him.
Yeah,
He's just like,
yeah.
what the hell? Like, the whole crowd, they played it really well because, you know, usually in these, you saw once somebody wins, their music comes on, right? For whoever won. There was no music after Undertaker lost at WrestleMania 30. It was quiet. And the crowd couldn't believe what they saw. And then they showed this guy, and everybody's like, wait, did this just really happen? And yeah, it did.
Huh. Yeah, I've never seen this before. That's interesting.
For wrestling fans and stuff, yeah, that's a big me for, like, for wrestling fans.
So my question with this then, right? You said they didn't really acknowledge it until he becomes 10-0.
Yeah.
So again, my question comes kind of from, like, you said that they might tell them, like, hey, this person's supposed to win. So you're saying, like, for those first 10, like, maybe it wasn't planned to have this streak, and then it kind of became a big talking point, and then
the streak wasn't. It legitimately wasn't planned. Like, he was a big character, right? He was a big star in the company, so he was winning those matches. Like, they figure out, okay, Undertaker's going to win, but it was an organic thing. They didn't really even realize that he had won 10 in a row, like, until, like I said, at WrestleMania 18 when something happened. Then they're like, wait a minute, he's 10-0. And then it was brought up during the lead up to that match. Then it became a big thing of, like, oh, he's undefeated at this. Let's keep going with this.
Yeah. So then why, I guess at that point, so I guess once you get it to a certain point, you're like, okay, we're going to keep him winning until we want the person to beat him. So, right. Until we
find the right time for him to lose the match. Yeah.
Right. So you're saying it was Brock Lesnar. It was the right time. Okay.
Some people disagree with that, but yeah, it was determined Brock Lesnar was the right guy.
Okay. And then from there afterwards is when Brock destroyed Cena because they're like, we got to keep this going now because he took out The Undertaker. Okay.
Yeah.
All I know The Undertaker from is when he went to Saudi Arabia to lift to hand off the cup to Ronaldo's team, like, this winter.
Yeah, he did that. Yeah, I saw that.
I had heard of him, I'd seen what he looks like, but that's the only thing I really knew him from before this.
So once again, WrestleMania 22 they held in Chicago was the last WrestleMania they had in an arena at the Allstate Arena in Chicago. WrestleMania 23 they held in Ford Field. And ever since then, they've held it in stadiums. So once you get bigger stadiums and stuff like that, you get bigger entrances, pyro, and you have these really long ramps. So what did you think of the entrances and pyro and flamboyance of this one?
Yeah, I get this is where I kind of picked up that this is the Shawn Michaels entrance all the time, I guess, because this was kind of like the same thing, and the Undertaker's, if I can remember, what was his entrance usually?
He came up from underneath. So they didn't show all of it because they actually had Shawn Michaels. He was dressed in all white. He was coming down from this big lift at the top of the WrestleMania stage, and came down kind of like an angel, right? And then the Undertaker, being the dead man coming up from hell, came up from below the floor.
Yes. I think does he do that a lot?
He's had some really interesting entrances. He had one at a WrestleMania where they had people kind of like a bunch of zombies on the side of the ramp, like grabbing at his feet. They had one where he was kind of on this like electric ramp, but it was covered by fog, where he kind of floated down to the ring.
Interesting.
They had one where WrestleMania 20 where they had a bunch of people dressed as druids with torches and kind of made an archway for him to walk down to the ramp. So
I like the coming up one because that makes sense with him. Again, like I didn't really understand the fascination with Shawn Michaels, like where they're painting him as the hero baby face type. So, okay, so I got a question for you, Casey. Before we
Okay.
get into this, did you pick these because you're a Shawn Michaels fan, or because you don't like him and you wanted to see him lose 2 matches in a row? Like, what's your? I was curious.
I picked these honestly because I think these tell the best stories in wrestling of as far as like how they got there and what happens in the ring.
Were you a
Um,
Shawn Michaels fan at all? If for
a
these to
little
stick
bit.
out of like
It's
we
one of
need.
those. It's one of those. I didn't like him necessarily, but I appreciated what he did in the ring. He's known as Mr. WrestleMania, as they mentioned in these two matches a lot, but he doesn't have a great record at WrestleMania. Like he still,
Yeah, that's. I was googling all kinds of stuff. So I'm guessing it's because of the, like you said, how he is like the performer in the ring, right? Is why, like you said, 2 of these you think are the best, and 2 of them feature him, and 2 of them he loses, but yet he still put on a show, right? So
he
like, I
is
guess that's why it would be like Mr. WrestleMania. If
he is
anybody, it should
six
be the Undertaker.
he is 6-11 at WrestleMania.
Wow, and Undertaker now is what, like 25-2 or something? I saw
Yeah,
20
something like that.
something and
He's
two.
he's retired, but he lost 2 matches. He's like I think he's 25-2 or something. But yeah, he's 6-11. But like I said, he's considered possibly the greatest showman in the ring in professional wrestling history. Um, and he does put on a great match, at least as far as a wrestling fan concerned. So this one took a while. This was like a 30-35 minute match, which if you're not into it, you can kind of zone out of it at points, I guess. Which I'm guessing
Yeah.
you might have at one point or two.
Yeah, well, so this was like the longest of them, I think, because you have the whole like, because it was a full episode of this show, right? So you get like
Yeah,
the match, and you also get the intro. I will say what captivated me more was the pre-show stuff, like them talking to people, and just like getting stuff. And like I said, I had a few questions about it, but I was just like, that got me more than the actual match did. Um, I think it helps that I had heard of both of these though. So like I had not heard of Kurt Angle before. Um, I'd seen and heard of the Undertaker before,
yeah.
and then I had heard the name Shawn Michaels before. So this one was a little bit more intriguing in that respect. Um, um, I was curious on how they would go with the match. Did they show clips of it during the pre thing before, or was that like other matches that they had? There was one
I
time he was laying like underneath of a chair.
I, I,
Undertaker.
th-
They were
I
both
think there were.
on the
I
mat.
think both. I think in the
Okay.
in the lead up to it, they showed a couple small clips from this match, but they showed some other matches that they had in the '90s,
Right.
and everything else.
I will say that like the camera quality was better in this one too. Even just a few years later, like the definition of the picture was better than the previous one.
I think this was when they first started going to HD too.
Yeah, that would make sense.
So yeah, what was this? 2009. That's about the time HD is really starting to kick in. So yeah, dude, you would hate to see like the old WrestleMania camera qualities because they can be hard to watch. So that yeah, there's
I've
definitely
watched. I don't know. I've watched 1950s baseball before on ESPN Plus, so I can put up with bad quality at times.
some of it's not much better. Let's put it that way. So there was a point in this where Shawn Michaels jumps off the top and just kind of gets thrown down to the ground, which I kind of thought was like, oof, that had to hurt. I don't care who you are. There was an incident where Undertaker was out on his feet because when he went, so Undertaker is legitimately like 6'9", 6'10" tall. He's a very tall man, right? So for him to be able to take a running start and jump over the ropes and do a somersault like that is no small feat, right? The part where he throws the referee and he grabs the cameraman and is supposed to put the cameraman in front of the Undertaker, right? That is another wrestler who was supposed to catch the Undertaker, but did not catch him the way he was supposed to.
Oh,
The Undertaker
dang.
legitimately did get knocked out for a little bit and was out on his feet for a little while there.
Huh.
So
Dangerous sport.
this is another match. I think a better example of the crowd really making the match, and the announcers helping with the story and telling what's going on in the match. And this is also the clip the clip I sent you of the announcer Jim Ross saying, "I just had an out of body experience."
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that makes a little more sense now as you see everything that led up to that like 45 seconds of a clip where you're like, I don't get what this is from. But he's an expert on this, so I'll use the clip. Okay, whatever. Maybe that makes a little more sense now where you kind of see why the announcer was kind of so flabbergasted at everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. It was yeah, I'll have to. I haven't actually clipped the clip yet, but it'll be in here. No, yeah, I thought it was a good like athletic display, right?
Yeah.
These people are crazy. What they put their bodies through for this. But so what's hold on? I'm trying to remember. So Shawn Michaels just going out of the ring and knocking everything off the table. That was the last match, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because then he was supposed to break the table. It didn't break.
The table
But
was supposed to break. It
at first, it just looked like he was upset and just threw everything off the table, and then he left it there for a bit before,
So typically, it is the Spanish announce table that gets that. So usually at ringside, they have it was WrestleMania, so they had 3 announce tables. They had one for the Raw announcing crew, one for the SmackDown announce crew, because they would announce their own matches. They had a different announce team. And then they have ones for the Spanish announce table. And typically, it was always the Spanish announce table that got messed up. Because it's the Spanish announce guys. We can destroy their tables. They're still watching the match. And they had headsets on. That's how, but yeah, that was the last match where he pulled everything off. The table was supposed to break. And it did not break.
So for this one, then, I do have a question, I guess, related to, damn, I'm like losing my train of thought right now. I had a question for you. What was it? Okay, so we were talking Undertaker, we were talking Shawn Michaels.
Yep.
And then, okay, so this is my other question, because I don't understand this at all. When they get out of the ring, is there a timer, then they have to get back into the ring?
Yes. Okay. So a wrestler can be counted out, right? A wrestler can be counted out 2 ways. One, if a wrestler, say, can't get to his feet by a certain amount of time in the ring, which is why you'll see the referee counting to like 5 or 10 or whatever it is.
Right.
If the wrestlers are outside of the ring, the referee has a 10 count. If at the count of 10 the wrestler cannot get back into the ring, the referee can count the wrestler out and the match can end on a count out and the other guy wins. Or it can actually end in a double count out where nobody wins because both of them are outside until the count of 10. And that came into play in this one because it kind of showed the desperation on Shawn Michaels in the way that he was willing to take a count out win just to get the win over the Undertaker at WrestleMania. Like most people don't want to count out; they'd rather beat them legitimately in the ring, right?
So it's almost like heel-esque, right? Of like, or like you said, maybe cheating, but still being like
a little bit, but also because the streak had reached such proportions. Like the fact that he was undefeated at this point so far, even just being able to say, I still beat you, even if it was by count out, would be enough. Right, kind of like, maybe kind of like winning a game in overtime or like on penalty kicks, right? Yeah. You still won the game, right? Would it have been better for you to win in regulation time? Yeah, it would have. But
winning a game off of an own goal, you're like, oh, we still beat you. And you're like, no, we
yeah,
actually beat ourselves.
I
But
still won. Doesn't matter. Like it still goes as on the scoreboard. It goes as W for me and a loss for you.
right, exactly.
So yeah, I don't know what else to really say about this one.
I'll have a further question about the count out stuff in the next match because the announcer said something that confused me even more. So,
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, for this battle, what the Undertaker wins, he extends his streak.
Yes.
Which sounds like an insane streak at 18. It was 17-0 before this, right? And then 18-0.
Yeah.
And like you said, that lasts for like another 3 years. So, yeah, crazy that was like originally organic. I thought maybe that was like their long play of like,
no, it legitimately was
this guy a
something.
streak.
It was something that happened and they didn't realize it till they were into it, and then they just kind of leaned into it, and it legitimately became a thing where it was like, okay, whoever wins the Royal Rumble gets a chance to challenge for the championship at WrestleMania, right? Mm-hmm. But then, because the Royal Rumble is kind of the start of WrestleMania season, like that starts leading into it. So basically, you can kind of count that as like the start of the playoffs, right? WrestleMania being the Super Bowl.
Right.
But then it also became a thing of who was going to be the one to take on the streak and try and end the streak. And like wrestlers were like, that was a big thing because it may not be the main event of WrestleMania, but it will be pretty high on the card.
Right. It's something that people tune in for.
Yeah, people legitimately were tuning in for it.
It's like the Taylor Swift showing up at the Super Bowl.
It is. And
people were watching just for that, all right?
But it will tie into this next match. So the next match is a women's wrestling match. It happened at NXT Takeover Brooklyn, August 22nd of 2015.
So is this another brand of theirs then?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Sasha Banks versus Bayley, right? So, for a long time, WWE didn't even have women's wrestling. They had a period in the 80s where they had characters like, or people like Wendy Richter and the Fabulous Moolah, some older wrestlers. Fabulous Moolah's really old wrestlers. And then they had an incident where one of their women wrestlers went onto WCW television with their women's championship belt and threw it in a trash can live on the air on WCW Nitro. Because she was no longer under contract, but they didn't get the belt off of her before she left. And that kind of ended the women's wrestling thing in WWE for a while. Really? Yes. Vince McMahon was not very happy about that. They've since made up, and she was recently inducted into the Hall of Fame. They brought it back, and they went about scouting for women wrestlers through fitness models and bikini modeling. They wanted... So wrestling is a visual art form, right? You can listen to wrestling, but it doesn't necessarily give you the same effect because you're not seeing what's happening on the screen, right? Especially when you have large, muscly bound, oily men, people of different characters, and now you have women. You want to put your best visual product forward. So they had at one point what was called the Divas, which was basically they went to a lot of fitness competitions, Hawaiian Tropics, bikini models, stuff like that. And they figured they could just train them to do some basic wrestling stuff.
Is this like the Stacy Keibler era?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, you were right. She was a Ravens wrestler, Ravens cheerleader, and she's also a Towson University alum like myself. So I can say I went to school with her.
Clap, clap, clap. The sad part is, I don't think there's people who might have went to school with her and didn't even know it. And then next thing you know, they might look up at one point and they're like, did I go to college with this chick?
Yep.
She dated George Clooney for a while. Like, she legitimately
was in How I Met Your Mother.
She legitimately dated George Clooney for a while.
Yeah.
She has some very impressive legs too, but, That was actually her theme music in WWE. Was a version of ZZ Top's Legs.
Oh, okay.
But so they went that way for a while. Now you still had some great women athletes who did some great things in the ring, but they started focusing more on looks, and they started doing things like bra and panties matches, where the purpose was the first one to strip the other person down to their bra and panties. The person in their bra and panties lost, and the other person won, and consequently everyone won because now somebody's in their bra and panties, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had a bunch of them that did appear in the pages of Playboy. The woman who is now Brock Lesnar's wife, she went by the name of Sable at the time, Rena Merrill. I think Stacy Keibler might have been, or they tried to get her. They tried to get a lot, but so they didn't treat their women wrestlers the best. And as many people might have seen, with a lot of the Vince McMahon stuff that's going on right now, they definitely didn't treat their women in the company the best. But I will admit I was part of the problem. So go back to our last match, right? That match drained the crowd. The crowd was really into that match, right? And you can kind of tell that took a lot out of the crowd. They were cheering, they were hooting and hollering, and they were up for it. So they can't necessarily go to another big match right after that. The crowd just can't sustain. So a lot of times they would have what's called bathroom breaks or let me upset. In the last match at WrestleMania 25, it was them introducing the Hall of Fame class for that year. Other times, it might have been your women's championship match, or a women's match of some sort, or the bra and panties match, or something like that. Kind of give the crowd a chance to bring everything back down to a decent level. In all fairness, they think they're probably not going to pay attention to it anyway. They're probably going to get up, get a hot dog, go to the bathroom. If they're at home, they're going to use the bathroom, grab a beer, grab a drink. And then once they hear everything is ready for the next match, that's when they're going to hurry up and get back to their seat to get interested. I was part of the problem. I was a fan of wrestling. I looked at some women's wrestling matches, great. But I didn't really appreciate it, and I didn't give them the respect that they deserve. So like I'm not gonna act like I'm this bastion of like, you know how things should be and stuff like that. I was part of the problem. So after I kind of explained this before, they used to have what was called different territory, right? WWE, which was then WWF. Before that, WWF had the Northeast, New York, Boston, Connecticut, that area. There was a Mid-Atlantic, which had like your Baltimore, your Charlotte, stuff like that. You had stuff that was in Texas. You had the AWA, which was Chicago, Detroit, stuff in that area. You had one far out west. You had like Florida Championship Wrestling. So what used to happen back in the days is people would go to wrestling school, learn how to wrestle, right? And then they could go to different territories. They might stay in a territory for 6 to 8 weeks, go through something, then they could move to another territory, right? So this is how they would get practice and kind of work their way up to get higher on the card and get better because they're appearing in front of different crowds. And if they had a character, they could make tweaks and mold that character and stuff, right? And then at one point you had the NWA, which became World Championship Wrestling, which was your Southern Wrestling. When everything went national, WWE had, the rest of the country. And they went out of business in like 2000, 2001, something like that, right? You have what's called independent wrestling, which is the stuff that goes on at your local gyms and boys clubs and smaller venues. But they didn't have anything outside of these wrestling schools for people to get practice or kind of work their way up. So at some point, WWE started their own developmental group, which was NXT. It started as a reality show, and then they turned it into a full developmental thing. They partnered with Full Sail University because they had a bunch of stuff down there, and it's in Florida. It's in a great place. They have cameras there, and they have so they could get these people in there. They could train them. They could have shows once or twice a week. People could come in so they could get experience in front of a crowd. And they started kind of doing local tours in Florida. So these people could get in front of a crowd and learn how to play off of crowds and things. And like I said, they could work on their characters and work on promos and being on a microphone and stuff like that. They started getting all these people in, and some of them were women. Some of these were women who had grown up watching wrestling and wanted to be wrestlers. Or in the case of one, was the daughter of a wrestler and eventually wanted to be a wrestler. So like I said, the women they had before were like bikini models. They were using it kind of as a jumping off point to get to like Playboy, to get to like Hollywood, to be in TV shows and movies. Eventually they started getting these women who wanted to just be wrestlers. And it got to a point to where I think it was an episode of Monday Night Raw where the women came out and I think they had like 90 seconds to do a match. And people online were fed up. And this hashtag on Twitter started going crazy called Give Divas a Chance. And then it started going more because then people started realizing like, wow, they're not giving these women the chance they deserve. And it started going further and further and further. And eventually, WWE started to have to take notice. Meanwhile, in NXT, you had these 4 women. They call themselves the 4 horsewomen of NXT. Charlotte Flair, who was the daughter of the great wrestler Ric Flair. The redhead, Becky Lynch. She was a former flight attendant. She was a wrestler in Ireland, then to flight attending, and then she wanted to be a wrestler, came to the U.S. Then you had these 2, Sasha Banks and Bayley, who are still best friends. And they started...
They're best friends?
Yes, they're legit. People have relationships. Back in the day, they couldn't do that. They couldn't be seen with each other. But yeah, they are legitimately best friends to this day.
Oh, okay.
They started... they had a trainer down there by the name of Fit Finley who started letting them do other stuff. Started letting them wrestle like the men wrestle because that's what they wanted. And they started getting rave reviews and they started putting on great matches. And then this groundswell started to come up and people started recognizing it. And then this event happened. So I was working at Walmart at my smaller store in the ghetto in Panorama City out here in California. And this is when I learned about alerts on your phone because I had the next day off because the next day was SummerSlam. And I was going to watch SummerSlam. So I managed to get the day off. So part of the way through the night, my phone is going crazy because I had all kind of alerts turned on. And I kept seeing that this Sasha Banks, because I kept hearing about these women. Oh, these women are putting on great matches. And like I said, I was part of the problem. I'm like, no, it's women. They're not putting on great matches. Then I heard, oh my God, the Sasha Banks Bayley match might be the best wrestling match of the year, period. And that's when I did 2 things. First, I was like, okay, I got to tone down the alerts on my phones because I can't have this just vibrating in my pocket every 30 seconds. And so now I have it alerts on my phone set up much better where it's not.
Yes.
It's only stuff that I really want. 2, I was like, okay, you got me intrigued. I need to see this match. So I went home that night and WWE Network, great thing. I got off around midnight, got home around 12:30. And did some things and sat down on my couch and I watched the event from start to finish. And this was the semi-main event, so this was the second to last match of that night, and it was probably the best match of the night. And I was on my couch. And I remember watching it, played the match, and then it came up to it, and we'll get to. They had a little thing that told about the story leading up to it, which I needed because I didn't know who these women were, the story behind it. And then I watched the match. And at the end of the match, I had to pause it, and I was kind of out of breath because I was like, what did I just watch? That was up at the time and still may be one of the best, probably the best women's match I've ever seen, and it's one of my favorite wrestling matches of all time. It legitimately changed how I looked at women's wrestling, and it changed things for a lot of people. So this event was held in the same venue as SummerSlam the next night, the Barclays Center. The crowd was hotter and went more crazy for stuff during NXT Takeover, this whole event, than they did the entire next night. Part of that could be it's 2 nights of wrestling back to back, so maybe they were just worn out, because a lot of it were some of the same people. Part of it could be this was just a better show than what happened the next night with your main event. So what did you think of the intro video that you got for this?
Yeah, so I assumed we're supposed to be rooting for Bailey here because Sasha Banks is like, we're not gonna let some bow wearing, headband wearing girl be the champion of this, and I was like, all right, like, uh, I knew you before from Mandalorian, but I'm not gonna root for you because of this.
So real quick, she's actually related to Snoop Dogg. So she's had Snoop Dogg appear on her side at WrestleMania.
Sasha Banks is
She's a cousin of Snoop Dogg, yes.
really.
So she Snoop Dogg came out at WrestleMania one year with her. She is a fantastic wrestler. She is phenomenal in the ring. Good guy or bad, babyface or heel, but she plays that bitchy heel character so good. And I think this match shows that she really does. You looking up the Snoop Dogg thing?
Yeah, I was. I was like, I gotta see more information on this. But yeah, no. So like that was like my main gist I got from that is all right. So we're supposed to see Bailey as like the underdog, right? The one that we're supposed to
This
be
is like the
rooting for.
typical hero's journey, the plucky underdog fighting
Yeah,
against someone who tells them they can't make it and can't do, stuff like that.
because even times during the match, she like yells at her,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Like I
I'm
said,
like, okay.
she plays that bitchy role so well. Now,
And this is like I said, when I noticed the commentators a bit more, it was this one because like I think it was like the color commentator would be like, "What are you talking about, dude? Like Sasha Banks is clearly better than
yeah,
Bailey.
yeah,
Bailey's never going to be good enough." And I was like, "Oh my god, this guy's like over the top
yeah.
on that."
That is
Yeah.
Corey Graves. He is a former wrestler who unfortunately had some injuries and can't wrestle anymore. And they turned him into a color commentator, and he plays the heel role pretty well for that.
I
He
would
can
not be
he,
taking it if I was the commentator. I'd be like, "No, dude, no."
he can definitely be grating. He can definitely get on people's nerves, but he plays his part pretty well. So
So I guess the question, commentator wise, do they know what's going to happen?
so some
Do we know if they know?
commentators. So a lot of times they don't. A
Okay.
lot of times they don't want, like, so Jim Ross, the guy who commentated for the first two matches, the guy with the strong Southern
Yeah.
accent from Oklahoma. He's been in the wrestling business for years. He's always said he never liked knowing because he wants to call what he sees in the ring, and if something happens, like he wants to be just as shocked, or like he
Right.
wants the
Right.
crowd to be able, the people hearing him announce the match, he wants them to legitimately feel like he wants them to go be going through the same thing that
Experiencing
they
it
are.
for the first time,
Yeah,
as if
and,
he's calling like a baseball game that is
yeah.
not like that. Yeah,
I don't know if all wrestling announcers feel the same way. There's a lot that do. They don't like knowing the finish to a match or what's going to happen. Sometimes they can tell certain things. So, like, we go back to the first match where the table didn't break. Sometimes there may be a crash pad under their table, right? Which, if they come in and they're getting set up and they have their notes and stuff, and there's a crash pad underneath their table, I think they can pretty much tell, like, they know their table's getting broken that night, right? Okay. So at some point I'm gonna have to move all my stuff off here, but so some stuff you can kind of tell, but yeah, a lot of times they don't know. A lot of times they will legitimately be watching this, experiencing this just as we are. And you can tell, especially now with the way it is now, after Vince McMahon has left and his son-in-law is in charge of the company. There's a lot more of that because there have been people who have come back to the company that people didn't know about, and everyone is legitimately shocked. Like, oh my god, I didn't see this coming. What other questions do you have here?
Okay, so the question I had about this, you said about the count out, right? This is where I had a question
Yes,
about this. At one point, Bailey is laying in the ring, and
yes,
Sasha Banks is laying outside the ring.
yes.
They start counting out. She gets up and goes in, but one of the commentators says that she could have won if she had stayed out of the ring, but she went on instinct
Yes.
Like,
Okay.
so I'm like, why would she win if she's out and the other one's in? Is my main question.
Okay. So this was a championship match for the women's championship, right? In professional wrestling, there is a championship advantage. The title can only change hands through pinfall or submission. Or like in a cage match, if you escape the cage first. Or like if there's certain stipulations to the match, right? The title can change hands. Typically, a championship cannot change hands if there is a count out or a disqualification. So in some championship matches,
So she's like the reigning champ. She can't
Sasha Banks
walk.
is the champion. She would technically lose the match, but she would still remain champion because she lost by count out or disqualification. And that is another way sometimes that they can kind of keep a feud going, or they can keep it where the good guy wins, but the bad guy is still the champion afterwards because the bad guy got himself disqualified or did something and got disqualified or got himself counted out or couldn't make it back into the ring and got counted out. So the good guy wins, but it's a sad day because the good guy still couldn't vanquish the foe and the bad guy is still your champion.
Right. Okay.
So,
All right, so that threw me off. I was not familiar with that.
And I get that. If you're not a wrestling fan, you don't follow it, you might be like, I don't get this. Like, so like I said, this match changed a lot of things for me as far as women's wrestling. It showed a ton of athleticism. It showed a great version of storytelling for this match. And ever since then, I've been a fan of these women. Was there a difference outside of the announcers in this match between the other two for you?
I don't think so. I think that's a compliment, right? In the sense of like, I didn't notice a different like quality level or anything. So, for you to be saying that this is the one that kind of really broke through the mainstream wrestling to saying like, hey, wake up. I can see why, right? Because like it didn't seem like I didn't know what to expect from a women's match just because, like we kind of talked about, I heard of Stacy Keibler, right, and I've seen her in other stuff, but like I never really watched any of that or wrestling. Like I would see some stuff as I'm like flipping channels before or something, but so I didn't really know what to expect, and so the fact that it was like, the same quality and athleticism, it I think is a testament to what they've done to kind of, I guess, expand into different demographics.
Yeah. And like I said, maybe even just a year before this match, it wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have been the same level of athleticism. It might have only gone like 5 minutes. They might have given them 5 minutes tops. If they had a legitimate match, they might have given them a little bit more if they did like a Thanksgiving feast match or like a summer barbecue match where they're basically having a food fight and squirting ketchup and mustard all over each other.
Right.
Or a bra and panties match or something like that. Like it wouldn't have been the same quality because they wouldn't have given them the same time, and it would just been looked at completely different.
I will say one thing that's nice about the Peacock stuff is it seems like their ads are usually on the are not intrusive. Like they're pretty. There was an ad right before the packaged video of this, and then there was one after the match. So it was kind of like just turn it on and watch it. That's how it was for each one, really. It was like, they
didn't just throw a random ad in the middle of the match. Like, that's good to hear. I think I have mostly the ad free version, so I don't get a ton. But that's good to hear because that, like, if that came in the middle of the match, that can ruin the entire experience. Which, I mean,
like the vibe of the.
You didn't have a great experience as it was, but like I can imagine it would have been even worse if you would have got an ad for like Poker Face right in the middle of the match.
It's like 90-second ad. You're like, oh my god, I can't even skip.
I don't even want to be watching this now. I gotta watch this stupid commercial too. So yeah, look, like I said, I know this isn't your thing, but when there's bad wrestling from many different perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
storytelling, just in match work, creative things behind it, it's bad and it's horrible. And it's one of those things where it kind of makes you ashamed to be a wrestling fan. And there's been some creative things that people have stopped watching wrestling for because it's like that's just a bridge too far.
Interesting.
I don't want to go down that road anymore. But for me, like I said, when it's good, it's good. To me, professional wrestling at times can be the best of what this world should be. Because if you look at the crowds, right? This is a big event. WrestleMania, especially WrestleMania 25 at the Reliant Stadium in Houston, right? There was like 70 some odd thousand people there. Look in the crowd. There's people from all different ages, race, creeds, color, ethnicities, people from all different countries, all over the place that come to watch these events. And a lot of times they're sitting there and, you know, if you buy 2 tickets, you obviously you know the person who's sharing the ticket next to you on one seat or the other, right? But you might not know who's sitting next to you in one seat or the other. And I've heard people striking up friendships with people from other countries because they're so into this and they start talking with each other during it and they become fans. They did a WrestleMania in New York. I want to say it might have been 29, where there was this character called Fandango, right? And he was a ballroom dancer of some sort. Go ahead, laugh. It's funny.
Like the movie Fandango, like the movie phone type thing.
That was the name, Fandango, right? But he had a very catchy theme song that the crowd would hum and sing when he would come to the ring, like the entire crowd. So when at WrestleMania, the entire crowd was humming and singing his theme song, right? So it was at what's the new stadium the Giants have? Not the Meadowlands, whatever it is.
MetLife.
Yeah, it was at MetLife Stadium. WrestleMania was that year. So there's people they leave MetLife, they get on the subway because they're going back home. There's subway cars full of like wrestling fans. And the subway car, it's a banana scene because there's subway cars full of people and they're singing like his theme song in the subway car. And then like they had this little dance they were doing. It's, you don't get it. And I understand that, but it's the wildest thing because it's like, these people don't know each other, right? Like some of them do, but like they're just fans of this one common thing. And they can manage to come together to enjoy this common thing and enjoy it peacefully and respectfully with each other. And like I said, people have made friendships out of it. I'm sure there have been relationships that have started. And marriages might have been started from something like this. And I know it doesn't happen all the time. But it's something that I like to think, like I said, it can be the best of us when we look out in that crowd.
All right. So we're not rating it, right? Because there's no way to really rate these, I think.
I mean, like for me, these are all, I think, like I said, these are these are 5 stars because I think these are some of my favorite matches and these are some of the best ones. And I know you didn't enjoy it and I wouldn't ask you to rate this. If you want to, you can, but I can't imagine it's getting more.
No, there's nowhere to really rate them. Like I looked on Letterboxd, I couldn't really find, because sometimes they're adding different things on there. So I was like, I'll just see if they're on there so I can rate them and add them to the playlist, but like my list. But no, yeah, I don't have to rate them. But no, I think we had a good conversation about it, an hour and 40 some minutes talking about something that you really enjoyed. And I'm sure there's people that are listening to this that enjoyed these as well, or have never watched anything and had a ton of questions like mine and got the information from you. So stuff I probably would have Googled if I didn't have somebody like you to explain it, but I felt like it'd be good podcast content to ask these questions and get the answers. So
trust me,
for other people that are confused.
I know this is a one-time thing with wrestling on this podcast, and I'm fine with it. But you know, like I said, you've shown. I can tell you were really into The Office and you were really passionate about it, and it's something you enjoy a lot. And I've asked you some questions here and there about it. Same thing with Lord of the Rings. Like I'm sure I had a million questions that you were you were just like, and for you or someone who's really into that, like you can answer off the top of your head. But for someone who was like me coming into it, it was like, so what is this? Are there any good
Right.
like? Are there any good orcs? Like,
Right. Right. Right.
I don't know. Like, to me, it would seem like there should be good orcs, but apparently there's not.
Okay, so I guess we'll go into what we're talking about next week. So, like it is around the season for WrestleMania, it is around the season for baseball, which will have started by the time we did this. But the last few times I wanted to pick it, this movie was not streaming anywhere. Now it is. And we're going to talk Field of Dreams. So, back to films. It's on Prime Video. So, make sure if you're, I own it, so that's how I'll watch it. But especially because Prime Video is now inserting ads unless if you pay a certain amount. Um, but yeah, so we'll be watching Field of Dreams, 1989 classic father son baseball movie. Uh, yeah, so that's on Prime Video. We're back to, did I say next week? I mean next time. We're back on the bi-weeklies here as we prepare for, I am having a child in July, so we're trying to rack these up, spread these out. So we're going to be recording quite a few in advance here. Yeah, we might even have guests or other people jump on if I'm not able to record at some point. But just stick with us. We're having a lot of fun doing the podcast. We got like 32 subscribers already on YouTube and some pretty good views when these things drop right away. So just thank you all for that. Make sure you rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also like and subscribe to us here on YouTube if you're watching the video. Have a great rest of your week, and we will catch you next time.